Good afternoon. Glad that you've chosen to spend some time studying the Bible with us today. Today we're looking at the Gospel of Mark, chapter 2, verses 23 through 28. One Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the bread of presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." When I was reading this passage, I was reminded of a political debate I saw years ago, where one of the candidates mentioned John F. Kennedy, and the other one said, "I remember JFK. I knew JFK, and sir, you're no John F. Kennedy." I wonder if the Pharisees had a similar moment when they were wondering why Jesus' disciples were doing something not lawful on the Sabbath. And Jesus said, "Haven't you ever read about David?" Drawing an immediate comparison. Well, of course they'd read about David. David, the most famous king of Israel. And they were being pointed to a comparison between Jesus and David. What was the big deal in the first place? Well, the Sabbath is one of the Ten Commandments. Honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. That wasn't the initial problem. The problem was that in the intervening years, since Moses gave that in the Ten Commandments, they had their ancestors had come up with a list of ways to honor the Sabbath because they wanted to be careful. They wanted to do what was right. And so they came up with a list of 39 things that, do or don't do these things, and you'll be honoring the Sabbath. The intention was good, to try to do what God wanted or to not do what he didn't want. But the problem was those man-made rules became as important or more important than God's rules. And so when they said that, why are your disciples doing what's not lawful? They're really referring to those laws, not the verse in Exodus chapter 20, which is where you find the Ten Commandments. So a lot of times people with passing knowledge of Scripture want to look at the gospel encounters of Jesus and the Pharisees and paint some picture of Jesus as a lawbreaker, agreeing with the Pharisees, but in disagreement with the Pharisees. It didn't matter. And so since Jesus was a lawbreaker and it didn't matter, it really doesn't matter if I'm a lawbreaker too. That is absolutely not the lesson to be gained here. That's not the lesson being taught. That's not what we're supposed to draw from this. The Sabbath was given by God. Jesus says that. It was made for man. And when was it given? It was given in the Garden of Eden. So it's an old thing. And it's still a good thing. It's a gift. But Jesus makes this connection to David. And it's interesting because he tells this story, recounts this story of David. It's a time where David was on the run from Saul, and they eat the showbread, the sacred bread, which was a more clear violation of things they shouldn't have been doing, but was in this extreme circumstance was allowed. Now, the connection is to David, and they didn't miss that. The part of the connection that we might miss, but they probably didn't miss this either, is that at the time of that story, David was not king, but David had been anointed king by Samuel. So in a sense, David had already been anointed king. He was king by right, but he had not been declared king, and he had not come into his kingdom yet by all the people. And so when Jesus picks that story to compare himself, he is not picking that carelessly. That's on purpose, because he too has been anointed king. And at this point in the story, he has not come into his kingdom. And he makes that very clear. And then he says this thing at the end to the Pharisees, that the Sabbath was not made for man, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. You have to ask yourself, who says things like that? If you heard somebody say something like that, you'd probably step back, give yourself a little head start in case you had to run, or make some move to restrain that person, because clearly they're a crazy person, or they're just evil. But in Jesus' case, he wasn't evil and he wasn't crazy. He was God, and he was saying so. And this was a striking statement that he made at this point. Now, it's important for us to remember, just to circle back a little bit, that the Sabbath, as an example, is not something that we keep in an effort to win God's approval. The laws of God are not things that we perform in an effort to win God's approval. They are things that we do in loving obedience to God after we have a relationship with Him. We cannot, as a sinner, follow the laws of God and be made righteous. But as a Christian, as someone who has come to Christ for forgiveness of sin and been granted forgiveness of sin and living in obedience to Him, we will want to do what He says in loving obedience. So it's important for us to remember that, those laws, so to speak, those rules, so to speak, they're not just out the window. They're just not our way to gain favor with God. They're just things we do because we love Him. Well, I hope that you're having a great day today. I hope that you're staying in the Word. As always, if you ever have any comments or questions, I'd be happy to engage with you on that level. Or if you have something that you'd like me to pray for you about, I'd be honored to do that. Have a great afternoon. I will see you again on Saturday. God bless.